Guys, I can vividly recall a conversation we were having a year ago in this very setup about a movie that we knew was going to be nominated for Best Picture. That movie, of course, was Black Panther. And by God, we were right. It is nominated for Best Picture.
You gotta take your wins with it.
They are just geniuses.
We're the real winners of Black Panther.
Yes,
I think
truly.
that's probably true.
Financially,
All right.
emotionally, creatively, we did it. So congrats to us. 1 year later, I don't feel quite as strongly about any of the movies that we're going to be seeing at this ceremony next year. It's not quite as clear, at least in February, what's going to happen.
Right.
But I thought we should talk a little bit about what we see in all these platforms, these emerging spaces for new movies. Chris, what's the movie on the list this year, the calendar, that jumps out to you as clearly going to be there next February?
I think that Star Wars Episode 9 will get nominated for Best Picture.
Wow.
Because I think this is going to be a Return of the King situation. I think this is going to be a thank you note to Disney and the Star Wars Lucasfilm family of thank you for all you've done for the movies over the last few decades. You've reinvigorated the theater-going experience in the face of all these incursions from home entertainment, from Netflix, from everything else. This is the crowning achievement of Hollywood movie making in like the last 40 years. And this is the last film in this saga. It'll be kind of fractured after that because you've got some of it is going to be on Disney+. They don't really have a plan. They have a bunch of trilogies from Rian Johnson and Benioff and Weiss in the works, but nobody knows when those are going to get released. And I think this is the time to celebrate it. And I think a lot of people would watch the Oscars if they did it.
I agree with this, but I have a follow-up question.
Let's do it.
What about popular Oscar? And how does that affect Star Wars? Because there are a bunch in the mix where you could say Us could probably land a Best Picture nomination.
Jordan Peele's new movie.
Yes. Kate, you wanted to submit one.
Yeah, The Lion King.
Yeah.
Yes.
Comes out in July. John Favreau's version. Beyonce, Donald Glover. It's going to be big. But is it going to be Best Picture big or is it going to be
Totally.
popular Oscar big?
There's also a new Toy Story movie,
Right.
which not technically, but in past years, it could have certainly been in the Best Picture conversation, but will it be shunted to popular?
It's very plausible. That all depends, I think, on whether the popular Oscar actually happens, which we have not gotten official confirmation on. I, of course, think that's a terrible idea. Why not just nominate The Lion King for Best Picture if you can do it? And
Love it.
likewise for Episode 9. I think that's an interesting concept. Star Wars has a complicated history with the Oscars.
Yeah, absolutely.
The original film, A New Hope, was nominated for Best Picture, and then no film since. The third film in their trilogies, sometimes you get Return of the Jedi, and sometimes you don't. It'll be interesting to see what happens. J.J. Abrams also not often nominated at the Oscars.
No, I mean, we could probably be sitting here this time next year and be like, oh, I think Adam Driver is going to win Best Supporting Actor, and that will be the version of the make good that we're talking about. But
that would make him 2 for 2 in that category.
Something about this makes me think, like, man, like I feel like this is coming.
Amanda, what do you think? What do you think we're going to see?
Well, I don't know whether we're going to see this, and I was talking to you about this before we started filming, and you cautioned me against hope. But there are more possible female directors this year than, say, last year. Greta Gerwig is making a new adaptation of Little Women, starring Saoirse and Timothée Chalamet. That formula has worked for her in the past. Also, Kate, you're glowing. So am I. It's going to be
So
for
excited.
us, and that's nice. Marielle Heller, who directed Can You Ever Forgive Me, is directing a Mr. Rogers biopic starring Tom Hanks, which just says Oscar.
You'd think so, except
That's
Won't You Be
true.
My Neighbor was not nominated
That's
for Best
true.
Documentary
That's
this
true.
year.
I like
so,
to think maybe they were just clearing the way. There's also a new Dee Reese film.
Mhm.
There is a film coming out of Sundance called The Farewell, starring Awkwafina, directed by Lulu Wang, that is getting a lot of buzz. So, every year we hope, and then every year we're disappointed. But maybe this year we could just consider nominating one female director. I don't know, dare to dream. You guys aren't saying anything.
I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah.
Historically,
Yeah,
that's
well,
just not something that has happened very
sure.
often, and not because it wouldn't be wonderful for Greta Gerwig to be nominated again or for Lulu Wang to have a moment after Sundance. I think it's possible. It just historically is not something that happens very often. Have you guys considered Ad Astra as a potential Oscar film?
I've considered it. Space movies are kind of an interesting dice roll because I feel like it's either a ceiling or a basement situation. You either get Gravity or The Martian or something that there's a huge collective interest in, but the more culty appeal ones tend to go unnoticed by the Academy in my experience.
So it'll be interesting to see if Ad Astra becomes a culty appeal film. This is James Gray's space opera starring Brad Pitt. James Gray, of course, is best known as sort of an independent filmmaker capturing stories about people living hard-bitten lives in New York City. New York City, of course, is not space. So this will be a transition. I'm very curious to see what happens.
He's throwing out all the big names when he's talking about this movie so far. 2001, Apocalypse Now. So, I mean, it's definitely got a huge appeal. to you and I.
So ambition,
Yeah,
whether it can deliver
and
is
ambition,
another
yeah.
question.
Any other films that you guys think we'll be seeing a lot of in the next few months?
Do we think like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Anything's gonna happen with that? A lot of Brad Pitt next year too.
Yes,
Ad Astra.
indeed.
Yeah.
It's worthy of a discussion for sure. This is Quentin Tarantino's 10th film, I believe, and it's pretty glitzy. It stars Brad Pitt and Leonardo
They've
DiCaprio.
been shooting it around our office.
They're shooting it right around Hollywood,
Yeah.
the titular Hollywood. And Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, of course, is about 1960s Hollywood and essentially events surrounding the Charles Manson murders, which feels like a dicey idea for Quentin Tarantino. But then again, Quentin Tarantino kind of lives inside of dicey ideas. That is really his métier. I'm not sure if Quentin Tarantino is still an object of Academy affection. I think he's certainly a huge Oscar contender in theory every year, but his movies are getting increasingly, grotesque and operatic.
Sure. From the director of Reservoir Dogs, I think he's getting there. I would say that Amanda mentioned before about Hollywood's infatuation with itself. I don't know if this is the mirror image that they want to see.
Yeah.
I mean, this is obviously a very complicated time in Los Angeles history. It's also, Tarantino has become an increasingly complicated figure, I think, over the course of the last few years. So watching him weather and or play the outside of the movie stuff like that game will be really fascinating.
Yeah, I just have an emoji face in response to it. I want it to work out. I am a Tarantino fan, and I think I like all of those actors, and I like the Cinerama Dome. You know, I like going there. I'm glad to see it. It's very fun. But this seems like a real tightrope, and I don't know.
I'm going to throw another movie out there.
Yeah.
To your point about Star Wars, have you considered Avengers Endgame?
Okay. Oh, God.
I think that it definitely could get nominated.
Yeah. We've kind of been throwing around as a joke like a Robert Downey Jr. Oscar campaign, like his final Tony Stark appearance, like doing kind of like a Hugh Jackman, Logan. It's like testing the waters.
I think it's not crazy.
I don't think it is either.
I think it depends on what the ratio is in that movie of leftovers to action scenes. If it's leftovers and they sit around for like 3/4 of that movie being like what we lost, what we gained, what we found out about each other, and then they fight, I think you'll get a little bit more critics being like, this is actually the one. This is the best one they've made so far. If it's actually 10 minutes of leftovers and 2.5 hours of aliens fighting, then I think that people will probably forget about it by the time the Oscars come along.
Remember when the Avengers movies were funny?
No.
The Avengers movies were funny?
The first one it had jokes.
It had the one scene where they're eating together, right?
It had the Joss Whedon like
instead of
quip
like
factor.
3 hours of like aliens fighting each other while crying. Really? This is what you brought to us?
They're definitely taking themselves very seriously with this movie.
Yeah.
Like too seriously.
Yeah.
So that
I'm
has
okay with
Oscar
it.
campaign written all over it.
I've
It's great.
committed upwards of 100 hours to these movies at this point, so
I'm into.
take
Yeah.
me seriously too. I don't need to be joked at.
It's going to be funny when we're doing Chris Evans versus Adam Driver for Best Supporting Actor. Captain America versus Kylo Ren.
Well, can we also talk about Adam Driver, because The Report is another
Right.
Sundance movie starring Adam Driver and Annette Bening that is getting a lot of attention. Definitely seems like Annette Bening is going to get her Lifetime Oscar for playing Diane Feinstein. I mean,
We've said this many times.
we've
in the
said it
past.
many times.
No,
and
and
we're
also-
often
20th century
wrong,
women.
but
To your point, this is sort of seen as a corrective for Zero Dark 30. That this is sort of like with hindsight, knowing what we know now, here's a story about the other side of that stuff and like what we did wrong during that time period.
I think there's one other movie that we should talk about. It's The Goldfinch. Goldfinch is, of course, a literary adaptation of the Donna Tartt's hit novel. It's directed by John Crowley, who made the movie Brooklyn.
Love Brooklyn.
And
Love John
Brooklyn, of
Crowley.
course, was much recognized at the Oscars.
you loved
I
Brooklyn.
mean, I'm keeping my Saoirse Ronan imitation in.
I know that you've read the novel, Amanda.
Yes, books.
I have books, yes. This is about movies, but books are good as well. I would be surprised. This has a plum October 11th release date. This is essentially the A Star is Born release date. And
So we're screwed.
Yeah.
well, I think it's just about whether these things will be there, not whether they'll win.
Book adaptations used to be a major part of prestige films and the Oscars, and now just no one cares, right? More generally?
I don't know. I think it's hard to say. We're in this convulsive moment in the Academy, and it's possible that if there's an incredible performance in The Goldfinch, then it will be there.
You're right. I think that there used to be like a much more like you could just skip the rock right across the pond and
Yeah.
just make Bridges of Madison County as it was still a hit novel. Same thing for No Country for Old Men. For the people who loved it, like they're probably really excited for it.
It's also 1,000 pages long, so, I don't know.
It is Ansel Elgort,
Right.
who is certainly an actor.
I have another book adaptation to throw out there.
Oh.
What about It?
It Chapter 2?
Yeah.
I don't see it, but it does star Jessica Chastain and Emmy-winning Bill Hader.
Yeah.
And is directed by Andy Muschietti, who directed the first It movie, which is one of the biggest hits of 2017. So it's possible. Horror, as we know, has a hard time at the Oscars.
It just does seem like one of those years where a couple of blockbusters might fall into the right critical acclaim zone that we could have a bunch of them in the Best Picture.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see. I'll see you guys in 1 year.